Where are you today?
I am in Virginia. I'm on my farm.
What kind of farm?
We raise 3 acres of blueberries for U-pick operation in the summer. And we have pigs and cows and goats and donkeys and chickens and turkeys and guineas.
Sounds like a very labor-intensive farm, however. When I was married, we received 2 milk goats, Alpine milk goats, as a wedding gift, and so I decided to become a dairy farmer. In the 4th week, you have 500,000 gallons of goat milk.
Well, how did you milk the goats?
By hand.
Oh my gosh.
And I was making cheese and,
Right.
But then you can't sell it. You can't give it away. Duh, they never stopped giving milk.
Welcome to Rural. In this episode, I'm speaking with the host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, humanities scholar and author of The Language of Cottonwoods, Clay Jenkinson, about the history and culture of rural America.
Let's do what you want.
I was a little nervous. Clay was my first interview for the series, and I'd been a listener and fan of the Thomas Jefferson Hour for years. I asked him to dig deep into the challenges facing his rural North Dakota, Virginia, America, and what can be done, if anything, about these challenges.
The fact is, a 21-year-old doesn't want to live 37 miles from a town of 5,000 people and 200 miles from a town of 100,000 people. They want all of the amenities of life, and those amenities can only be provided by urban situations. They would rather be at Tyson's Corner than in some obscure corner of Virginia. And so how do you keep them down on the farm? If they can make a lot of money, that's one thing. If the psychic income were through the roof, that's another thing. But there's a huge sacrifice of amenities, of access, of the gene pool is pretty small out there if you're trying to get married. And so young people are saying, although I kind of admire my grandparents, I just don't want to live that life. So I don't know that we can fix this problem.
Is that rural lifestyle of our grandparents or some of the rural life or agricultural life, are they worth saving?
Yes, of course they're worth saving. The neighborliness, the humility and modesty. My grandmother never wasted a single thing. Nothing. The sense of decency, the kind of patriotism without Sean Hannity in it somewhere, civic virtue, volunteerism, that kind of thing. Those are great values. My grandmother on Sundays, we would go to church and then afterwards we'd take bread and pies to the nursing homes and she would walk around and she'd say, "Oh, Mabel, I brought you this loaf of bread. And Phyllis, I thought you'd like this rhubarb pie." And this was just her life. She never thought she was virtuous. She never thought that this was something that was going to get her into heaven. She just did it. And so those are incredible values.
Rural North Dakota sounded a lot like rural Virginia and the rest of rural America.
A North Dakota farmer had some wheat, a couple of dozen dairy, and some hogs maybe, some steers that they would send to the butcher in the fall, and a big garden. So we knew who we were. We produced food. And my grandmother canned about 500 quarts a year and froze and did everything else too. That was agriculture. And because of that, these people, like my grandparents, could weld and they could wire a granary and they could fix a car and strip an engine. And they had all these skills because that's who they were. And they really were extraordinary and very close to Jefferson's ideal of the truly independent person. This is who we were. We were clunky and provincial and not cool in any way. We were just these lovely, basic, neighborly, hardworking, pragmatic jacks of all trades. That's made us who we are. That's the North Dakota character. So here's the problem. We're losing those qualities.
What are some of the cultural things that we lose when we lose all these small farms?
I don't know my neighbors in a town of 100,000 people in Bismarck. Those qualities are largely rural qualities. And the small towns are drying up, A, as you said, because no one really wants to live that way anymore, and B, because the farms can't support small towns. Agribusiness doesn't create small towns. You go to the giant ranch and farm stores in a city of 100,000. You don't go to the town of 2,500 for your implements. You can't afford to. And so the small towns are dying. The only people who are staying in North Dakota are the elderly and people who are taking care of the elderly, and then a very small residuum of business like the bar and the tanning parlor and the post office and the convenience store. And frankly, people who are uncreative and don't want a more sophisticated life. And so this is really hollowing out rural life. Now that that paradigm is disappearing and people are more urban and people are certainly more sophisticated, I don't know that there's an answer to it. I say we're living on the fumes of a character that's disappearing. It's not clear that the problems of rural America can be solved.
That was not what I wanted to hear. So we talked about what, if anything, could be done.
we're going to have to make some hard and conscious choices if we want to continue to be interesting. And I don't want to be Tyson's Corner. I don't want to be Maple Grove, Minnesota. I don't want to be Aurora, Colorado. I don't want Honey Baked Ham next to Napa Auto Parts, next to Barnes & Noble, next to TGIF, next to Red Lobster. That you can get anywhere, and it's not all bad, but that's no answer. The answer has to be that we somehow cherish what's unusual about ourselves and stop apologizing for it and stop wishing it were a Starbucks.
Ah, yes, Starbucks.
We're up against tens of billions of dollars of marketing money that take a young person and say, unless you have Starbucks, your life is meaningless. It's not as if you're going to win this argument against marketing corporate capitalism, but I think you could create, the new ethos has to come from somewhere.
But from where? And what does it look like?
We need a spiritual revolution. I'm with Emerson. I'm an optimist. Emerson said, build a better mousetrap and they will come knocking at your door. No one wants to go back to that cream separator. No one wants to go back to walking half a mile with buckets to water your garden. That world that created this of chores, hard work, landedness, close to nature, family values, that came at a huge price. And now that we're this culture, this super hyper mechanized mediated culture, no one wants to go back to that. So what can we bring forward of it that is desirable? So you see quilting and you see canning groups and you see that sort of thing. It's a pretty small niche. I'm afraid we're going to lose it because the people get more urban, more sophisticated, more detached, more deracinated year by year. And so the question is, can we cling to those values without doing the work that those values came out of? And I don't know the answer to that. I want to say yes, but I think the answer is no. I think the answer is that we live in a hyper-mechanized world where, in North Dakota, people have heated garages. They start their car from in the kitchen. They go into their heated garage and get in the car and open their electric car garage door opener and go to some place where they do the reverse. And then they're never actually in nature anymore. And so what can we do to preserve that set of values? And I don't think a quilting club does it. I don't think that a canning club, if we believe that those values came from the agrarian, and I certainly do, then we either have to say farewell to them. That was then and this is now, too bad. We'll hold on a little bit in our memory. Or we have to create a 21st century analogous world where there is some of that.
What would you suggest?
If everybody in North Dakota would continue to grow a little, just a tiny little garden, if it's let's say the size of 2 card tables, that would change the future of the state. If every member of Congress had to grow 1 meal of their food per year, we'd have a different nation. We exempt the rulers of the country from the basic laws of life. They don't know anything because they're pampered and they don't live the way other people live. I don't think it requires getting up at 4 a.m. to go slop the hogs. It really just requires some commitment to shutting the clock off, putting your hands in that soil, feeling that you are between God and the earth, and feeling the inherent nobility of this. And I think it can be done. For an investment of $42, you can grow 5 meals per year of your own food. And this is fun and ennobling and exciting and romantic, and it'll change your life. I think that's the answer.
That is a great answer.
We know Virginia is attractive. The population is growing. People move to California. People move to Washington State. People move to Virginia. People move to Florida. Nobody moves here. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. But how do we survive this problem? Because if your rural life hollows out in Virginia, there's still a lot of Virginia. If our rural life hollows out here, it's not clear what else there is for people to do.
We have to be creative.
We really need to become more tolerant. We're homophobic, we're xenophobic, we're Islamophobic. Boy, there are a lot of phobics. If you want to attract young people who are alive to the world, they're not going to a place that is openly homophobic or openly racist. They just aren't. And so I say we North Dakotans have to become more hospitable, or we're going to become a white supremacist enclave where the people who gravitate here are going to be the people who want to live in a white-only community, who want to sneer at the LGBT community, who do think that Muslims are an open danger to the future of the United States. And there are, of course, as you know, as we found out in the last 5 years, I don't think there are 60 million such people, but there are certainly 20 million such people. And they may gravitate to Wyoming and to the Dakotas and to Arkansas, but they'd be more likely to come here because we don't have African Americans in any numbers. And so if you're looking to get into a white-only place, you don't want to be in your county in Virginia. You want to be in my county in North Dakota. Now, I think our incredibly harsh climate will prevent a lot of that from happening. But how sad that one of the few growth areas would be people that want to escape modernity.
We have some of that here. The people that are moving into our county don't realize that we're 52% African American. And so when we had a big brouhaha over the Second Amendment at our little Board of Supervisors meeting, 300 white, very well armed Second Amendment enthusiasts showed up to intimidate and bully. They kept repeating, "This is a conservative community." And I was thinking, buddy, you don't know where you are. And these are people that have newly moved into the county.
I think the whole country is going through a revelation that it ain't your grandparents' white Buick any longer. That's not what America wasn't that, and it certainly is not that now. And these minority communities are sophisticated. They have a lot of young people with advanced degrees. They're in the professional classes. They are highly educated and articulate. They know their rights, and they're going to insist upon respect. And I think that someone like Donald Trump was saying, let's postpone that a little. Let's postpone the reckoning. And I don't think the postponing of the reckoning can actually work, but it worked for a short time. But I think the grievance culture in America is, we're losing control of our country. It's a way of seeing that was hollow in Jefferson's time, and it's certainly hollow in our time. In North Dakota, our issue is with Native Americans, with American Indians, and the two cultures live as if they're same zip code, parallel planets. I think that is true in a lot of places, that white people are pretending it's still Ozzie and Harriet's America, and angry that it isn't.
So why did you move back?
Look, I moved home to North Dakota. I lived in Reno, Nevada, where I had a better life, a lot better life. I moved home because I thought, I want to be where I can smell manure. I want to be where I can smell alfalfa and silage. I want to be where I can see thunderstorms. And if the world falls apart, and periodically it appears to be about to, I want to be where I can form a community where maybe I grow the corn and somebody else grows the beef. I would rather, in a world in collapse, be in rural America than in urban America by far. And I would rather be in a place like North Dakota that still has some of those agrarian values than in a place where those values are gone or nearly gone. So I came home for those purposes, and I do absolutely love that. But what I don't understand about rural America is why it has really subscribed to this deep culture of rage and grievance. And that I just don't get. I can't understand it. Because the people that talk this way think that it would have been okay if the election had been overturned. They're also some of the most good and decent and loving neighborly people I've ever met. And so you think, how can these two subsist in their brain pan?
Do you think that things are going to fall apart again, or are going to get worse?
Yes, in some ways. I don't know how far it will fall. I thought with the election of Joe Biden that we'd maybe troughed out and we would slowly work our way out of this. And maybe that's what's happening. As a Jeffersonian, I have to believe that that's what's going to happen. But I wake up in the night and I think, okay, the misreading of the Second Amendment means, for example, that there are people, and I'm guessing millions of them, who have an arsenal, not a weapon or two, but an arsenal, like 50 or 100 or 200 guns and a basement full of ammunition. And when someone like Michael Flynn says we may need a military coup on the style of Myanmar, you and I can snort and laugh at that and think, what a moron. But he's actually sending a signal to those people and saying it may be time. Your time may be coming. And I think there will be street violence. I think there will be serious gun violence. I think we are going to have a low-level civil war, not just a cold civil war. I hope I'm wrong. And then when I think these thoughts, I try to shake it off. That cannot, no, no, stop being paranoid. And so I think maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. I hope I'm not right. But I think we're in a time where millions of people have lost faith in the system, and they're looking for simpleton answers. And a simpleton came along and gave them simpleton answers, and then everyone else is trying to be a junior simpleton in that party. So I don't know.
I really want to know. Where do you draw your optimism?
I'm a Jeffersonian. Jefferson said, those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God. And I think he was right. I think he was sort of laying out a fantasy America that was never really going to be. He was, after all, a plantation owner and a tobacco grower for export and a slaveholder. We get the limitations of that, but nevertheless, there's a nobility and a beauty to the agrarian. And I think he was right about the independence of the agrarian lifestyle. The problem is that we've stripped the culture out of agriculture in most cases, and it's agribusiness, and it's gigantic inputs, and many of them not good for the long-term health of the planet or the soil, even in the local area. Agriculture makes you sane. I think Jefferson was right. And the happiest day of my year, without question, comes in August, and I'm done with the day of something. I come into my garden, and I pluck 2 ears of corn and an onion and a cucumber and 2 tomatoes, and I bring them in, and within 15 minutes I have formed a little dinner, and everything is not only fresh, but I grew it. It's the parable of the mustard seed for me. I can put a seed in the ground, and then I can have this bounty. And when I do that, it's not only that I feel Jeffersonian or agrarian or whatever you want to call it. I feel better about life. I feel that I'm actually connected to the real basis of life, and that I have done something, I was going to say poetic, but that's not it. I've done something that has deep integrity to it. It reminds me of what's possible. I think that what we're going to have to start with is urban micro farmers.
If you just grow a pot of herbs, grow a tomato in a pot, grow something for yourself.
Then you'll want more, and then you'll also realize, oh boy, it takes a lot of care. That food just doesn't appear in the grocery store. The difference between a tomato that you grow and a tomato that you can buy in a grocery store is night and day. Okay, you live in a townhouse, get 2 5-gallon buckets and grow something. And then you might want more. And then there are community gardens at the edge of town, and you can, I think that that's the only way to make this revolution. I don't think it's going to come from top down. It's certainly not going to come from corporate agriculture. It's not going to come from government. It's going to come from people saying enough already to this kind of a petrochemical military industrial paradigm. And the people are going to at least insist on being allowed to do some of that without interference. I think we can build a groundswell in that way, but I see no other path, frankly.
Talking about this in front of groups, I always say, how many of you out there would work for free? Come on, let me see a show of hands. And of course, nobody raises their hands. And I say, well, that's what you're asking small farmers to do. Not only to work for free, but sometimes to pay to go to work. We're losing around 100,000 small farms in the U.S. a year. The average age of the farmer is 58. Farmer suicide's on the rise. Young people aren't interested in going into farming. Why would they? I believe it was in the 40s when 43% of our household income was spent on food, and now we spend less than 10%. And so
7% here, with the lowest in the industrial world.
People aren't making enough money, and they're having to compete with the lowest grocery store in price. It's difficult to attract them. We've got to find a way to support farmers and small agriculture the way the Europeans do. And I don't know how to go about that besides just doing a documentary and doing this podcast and talking to great thinkers who can come up with some ideas.
And what we get for it is hamburger helper, and I'm with Michael Pollan. I love beef, of course I love beef, but you don't want to think too much about the feedlots and the antibiotics.
How do we change it?
So we just need the right combination, the kind of Wendell Berry, Michael Pollan, Wes Jackson kind of combination, and find some young charismatics who can carry this word. And there are cooking shows that they might get, and there are things that can happen. And so I want to be optimistic about it.
Clay, I have quoted you horribly almost every time I'm in front of a group of people, and I wish you would correct me on this quote. Something along the lines of, the word humble is a derivative of humus, and that the closer you are to the ground, the more grounded you are, and the further away from the ground, the less humble you are. What is that?
You just got it. So humble comes from humus. Humus is the soil, is earth. Jefferson's view was that we shouldn't talk about God, we should talk about nature's God, and nature with a capital N. And so that every time our lives conform to nature and nature's law, they're good and sane. And when we deviate from nature and nature's law, that's where we go wrong. And so the principle of the golden rule, of course, everyone wants to be treated as they would treat others, and vice versa. That's natural law. Natural law is, if there's one loaf of bread, you and I split it. I don't get 97% of it. Jefferson thought that all positive law that deviates from these simple questions of equity and justice, distributive justice, are corrupt. And so now we live in this incredibly corrupt culture. It's shocking how corrupt our culture is and how much we just take it for granted and accept it. The 1% and the many, the idea that there are millions of Americans who don't have a living wage and that we're just sort of cool with that somehow, that's just appalling. The Republican Party now has given themselves over to the view that I've got mine, up yours. That's the motto of that group of millions of people. I've got mine, up yours. So I think we redeem ourselves when we get our hands on the soil. It certainly works for me. You know, I'll come home at a day like this and I'll think, oh, I'm tired. I'm just going to have a glass of wine and maybe read or maybe watch a movie. And then I'll think, yeah, but I better go check on those tomatoes. I get out there and I'm grumpy when I go out. I don't want to do this. And then after a short time, I'm just like down and looking at these plants and the little corn is coming up, and I'm thrilled then, and I come back in, and I am dirty, and so I think Jefferson was perfectly right about that. But I don't know how you break the incredible magnetism of the device. I don't know how you break that.
We have become a culture and society addicted to our screens, no doubt.
Jefferson is really my guy. I'm so sorry he's kind of stricken right now because of the whole race problem and so on. But he's right about these things, I think. It's redemptive, and it's been kind of the motto of rural America. And so first we had the Homestead Act, and we let that get away from us. And then we had the Reclamation Act, and we let that get away from us. And then we had the Farm Program, and we've let that get away from us. It turns out that the rich and the greedy always pervert whatever we try to do to protect the little guy, and they're extremely good at it. And then they kind of allow a few little guys to kind of survive around the edges, but never to prosper. I don't want to sound pessimistic in this discussion we're having, because I'm not really pessimistic, but I think that all I can ask for in my life is to be allowed to have my little niche. But I can never really expect the American world to get serious about food or to turn its back on the corrupt system that we have. While I read Wendell Berry and I adore Wes Jackson and I devour the books of Michael Pollan, I can't talk about this with the people in my world, because their view is like, get real. We're producing 1 million tons of soybeans here. That's where it's at. I'm sure that's how they'll look on my book, like, this is just some elitist talking about a world that never was and certainly never will be. And so I don't know what the positive answer is. If you made a documentary film about your farm, that would be an important thing to do, I think, because I think people are more fascinated than they know. They just don't know how to start to look at this problem. We're moving towards the first robotic farms in North Dakota. I see that as an unmitigated disaster. No one could have thought that through. But I think that's going to take over American agriculture before we can even blink. And so then how many people do you need in North Dakota when you've got 1,400, 200,000 acre robotic farms where there are no humans present? So I wrestle with this and I think, well, there must be something we could do.
What? What can we do?
If we had a North Dakota Homestead Act in which farmers were asked to create internships, but also to sell 10 acres at a below market price to young farmers, and we had shared equipment, and we had county extension agents to help these young farmers learn how to do this, and we had low or no interest loan. We had a marketing board to help make that cool. I think that thousands of young couples would come to North Dakota under the right circumstances. But they're not going to come now and try to buy 10 acres from some farmer and then think, well, what's my combine going to be? What's my tractor going to be? That's an impossible equation.
Who can afford to buy the land, buy the equipment, then the inputs are huge. And nobody can afford to do it. There's got to be some help for these young farmers that are interested in doing it. And, I want to set up an agricultural classroom on the farm. I want to have a school where we can teach people, but we can't afford to do that right now.
But you should do that because that's what we need. So I would, and I hate to use the word, but I would create like a commune or a community where, let's say there are 3 tractors for 40 farmers. You just check out the tractor rather than buy a $250,000 tractor. Then you'd have to see, does it cash flow? And does it create psychic satisfaction high enough to continue it? And I think it would. I do think that a lot of people are naive when they want to be little farmers and they don't realize it's just a hell of a lot of work. So you're going to have to weed out that population inflation no matter what. But I think there are plenty who would say probably have a conversation over at a beautiful restaurant in Charlottesville and think, wouldn't it be great if we had a little vineyard or if we had a little goat farm? And they might actually do it if you said, and by the way, there is a program that the Virginia legislature has set up where you're going to get training, access to equipment, and startup loans. And I think people then would think, well, maybe it's like joining the Peace Corps. You're not going to get rich. Maybe it's doable.
But how do we get the income for these small farmers up? When people are used to going to the grocery store and paying $1.99 for a pound of pork chops. With COVID, for the first time ever, we were given grants to give food away. It was fabulous. We loved that. We gave away eggs and berries and meat by the hundreds of pounds. It was terrific. We're looking at paradigms like that. What we might need is a groundswell of these food advocates like Michael Pollan and other folks who are really into this to really get political in trying to encourage people to get engaged in politics so we could replace some of those politicians with people who are concerned about this. Everybody's great. We're all artists and we're great at writing books or making films or creating music. What we really need to be doing is replacing some of those congressmen, or at least pressuring them to write legislation.
If a great celebrity like Brad Pitt suddenly decided this was the future, he'd get the attention that you want.
What about other countries?
If you go to France, you realize, whoa, it does work there. And why? The whole ethos is different. Capitalism doesn't have the same grip on the neck of the French population as it has on us. And the French like villages, but their villages have more amenities than our villages. And they have better food and they have better health and they have lower obesity rates and it shows. So these are choices. I think what we tend to believe is that the industrial production system that we have in agriculture is inevitable, and it isn't. It's a choice. It's a political choice that we've made in the United States, and there are places in the world that can show us that there are other really interesting paths. So that's one thing. The second thing is I don't think it's sustainable. It's not sustainable economically. If you look at the cost of our agriculture through the USDA and the farm programs and so on, those are not always the Jeffersonian nostalgia and romance is starting to be lost. And I don't think Congress is going to continue to be willing to fund, to subsidize agriculture in the way that it has. And when it does subsidize agriculture, as you know, whatever its intentions, it winds up subsidizing ConAgra and the giants and not subsidizing or helping the family farms that they claim are their primary interest. And so for many reasons, I don't think we have a sustainable agriculture. I think what we see in Virginia and New York and Maryland, and to a certain extent, even here on the Great Plains, is young people who want to reject that paradigm. So they're interested in CSAs and they're interested in farm to table and they're interested in knowing where their food was grown, but they're not getting any encouragement. That's like trying to stop the Titanic with a piece of chewing gum. And so we need to encourage that ethos and bring the culture back into agriculture if we want to live on a healthy planet and to be a healthy people spiritually and physically. So how do we get there from here is the question. And I don't see it. I don't see it coming. So we've created an industrial gigantism in agriculture, and that's how we produce our food.
Is anything happening in rural North Dakota that might help?
We have the only state-owned bank in the country. We have a state bank that exists to help people. It was created during the 19-teens by the Nonpartisan League, and it's meant to get around the problem of lending for people that need a helping hand in this. And I think we could use that tool. I'd like to see every state have a big, serious grant line in their agricultural programs for small niche farmers, organic farmers, sustainability farmers, that sort of thing. And if we did that, I think there are literally hundreds of thousands of young people that would be attracted to that if we can make it attractive. But if you tell them the only income is psychic income, they start. Well, I've known a number of CSA people here in North Dakota. They start, and after 5 or 6 years, they realize, psychic income doesn't pay the rent.
That's exactly what we found too. And you touched on a very important point that America supports our agriculture least of any first world country in the world. As you said, France, Italy, Germany, they all support their agriculture, and it shows. So I keep thinking there's got to be a legislative solution as well. If we could pay people $30 an hour and give them health insurance to come out and help us on the farm, I think you would get people that like to work with their hands. And we get kids that come out all the time from the city and they want to do this, but they don't have any background in it. They don't know what they're doing, and after a few years they quit. And we don't have the time to teach them.
So one hopes that in a market economy like ours, that the people will demand a higher type of food and culture, agriculture, and then that the government and the corporations will conform. But it doesn't appear to work that way because we have such a military paradigm of agriculture. We really wage war against the land. In North Dakota today, all the shelter belts that were built during the New Deal to protect the Great Plains from blowing, they've reached the end of their natural life. They're being bulldozed and not replaced. The wetlands are being drained. It's really Earl Butt's philosophy of fence post to fence post, and eke every acre you can, and then use a maximum number of inputs to play the equation of, can I put in these inputs that will overcome pests and overcome weeds and overcome drought and still cash flow, at least with government subsidies. And that works. It cash flows, but it's not in any sense of the term a healthy agriculture. And I think the national government shows no interest in thwarting that paradigm. I think that they are locked into it. Of course, the big money comes from Central Valley and California and from great corporations. The lobbyists are very powerful. And I think that they have convinced our legislators that the issue is food production rather than
and access.
Food is a part of life, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't see it happening. But the good news is in the United States, we have our 10th Amendment, so we're the laboratory of democracy. So what I say for my state, North Dakota, we could try this here. And if it worked, other states would be fascinated and would want to see if they could do it. Somebody has to start. And, what states are best suited to starting this? I do think Virginia might be, because you have a lot of highly enlightened people in Virginia and you have great universities. So you have a kind of an intellectual infrastructure, and you have a lot of people that like whole foods. And that's a class trap, but still it creates a constituency. Here in North Dakota, there is no interest in this, because if I went to the Farm Bureau and said, you need to have a grant line for young farmers who have 10 acres, they would just laugh me off the stage and say, come back when you're serious.
Well, don't you think that's because we don't have any legislators anymore that are farmers or that had come from a farming agrarian background? And one of the things that we advocate is to try to get people in these rural areas that are involved in agriculture into politics. My husband serves on our board of supervisors in our little county.
So, you have people like Michael Pollan who are doing extraordinary work in this area, and they're very popular and they're bestsellers. But it doesn't percolate into the government legislative process. So this is, of course, what's happening in agriculture is also what's happening in energy, which is also what's happening in foreign policy, which is also what, these are systemic problems of late capitalism. And it's very hard to think that much can be done about it, except possibly to be what you're doing, to create a little enclave within the larger system and be allowed, be suffered to do it your way if you're willing to sacrifice prosperity and in order to do it. But that can't be the answer. The answer is for us to fundamentally rethink our food supply and how we eat and why we eat and what we eat and where it was produced and under what circumstances, and is it sustainable? And so the books that I always recommend are The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, but also Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser, which is a horrifying book, but a really important one. But we need documentary films, a Hollywood miniseries about farmers who are bucking this system and wind up having a much higher quality of life, a reality show about people that raise goats. This could be done. And so it's going to take money, but there are probably billionaires who agree with your philosophy. And if you could tap them and make this cool again, you can live your life at the margins of American agribusiness. And as long as you have an income from law or whatever, you could probably, as you say, surf out. But you probably wouldn't start at the age of 20 making that your sole enterprise in life, because it wouldn't work. I'm a Jeffersonian, so I believe that that people are persuadable. That doesn't hold up very well in the last 5 years, by the way, but I'm still
I
a
know.
Jeffersonian.
Understand.
I think people are persuadable, and so the argument has to be made. And the argument can't be made in a kind of a upper crust, highly entitled left politics way, because that's going to be rejected by the great mass of the people of the country. It has to be made in a much more basic way, that it's in your interest to have your hands in the soil. It's in your interest to grow a little bit of your own food. It's in your interest to ask hard questions about what you ingest. That's more likely to be persuasive than the Whole Foods crowd telling us that it's important to have an organic rutabaga.
I agree. Yeah, listen, I'm from Texas originally, and when Whole Foods started, it was a couple of hippies in Austin, and I remember that. And I was all supportive. I was all in, but when they went on the trade market, I kind of rolled
Well,
my
I'm
eyes.
still all in because it's better than
Exactly.
Safeway, but
Right.
it means that. But every time you buy a steak at Whole Foods, you're engaged in a class action. You're showing that you can afford food
Right.
that most people simply can't afford, and so that can't be the answer.
Also, a lot of our organic agriculture doesn't come from the U.S. as well. It comes from China and Mexico. And how do we know? No, we don't know. And
I'm serious about writing a book or short book about how you can have a 12 square foot Jeffersonian garden in your own townhouse.
terrific. Yes, and I will support you 100% on that.
But I've loved meeting you. You're a kick.
Oh, great.
And
Thanks.
I'll meet you soon and say hello to your husband.
Sounds great. And thank you so much for doing this. And you take care. Safe travels, my friend.
You too, my friend.
Thank you for listening to Rural. And thanks to the Virginia Humanities, Healthy Suffolk, and Clay Jenkinson for their generous help and support of rural communities. I'm your host and producer, Amy Drury.